Welcome to Within WordPress, the podcast about all those fine folks working in that large WordPress community. With us today is a guest who has not appeared before and is in a capacity that we have seen before on the podcast. And today with us is Scott Stapley. Stapley? Do I say it correct?
Stapley. That's right. Yeah, happy to be here, Ramkis. Thanks.
So, like I said, you have been working with WordPress in one way or another, but you are CEO currently at BigScoots, which is a company that hosts WordPress sites. And I'm thinking the introduction of what BigScoots does is probably something we should start with, because I'm curious about any new or relatively new, because you're not new, are you? Let's start with that. How long have you been hosting for WordPress?
Yeah, my name is Scott. Thanks for the intro. I am co-founder, CEO, 14 years of BigScoots, held that position that entire time. My business partner and I have been running the show collectively for that entire period together. It's been quite a journey. We started in infrastructure, so it's kind of an interesting take on the current model, current industry of what WordPress hosting typically likes to see. Yep. So we had our roots in infrastructure and management of it. So we did a lot of off-prem managed infrastructure for some of the Chicagoland's Fortune 500s, where once upon a time, before the cloud as we know it existed, folks still needed to host things, as you can probably imagine, and they wanted to do so in an environment that had actual hands-on, high level of service, managing that infrastructure for them. Yep. That's how we started. We were the folks in the data center, hands on the equipment, racking and stacking, building the machine, just as we are today. And that makes us unique for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to get into as the podcast rolls on. That served itself very well to sort of understanding what enterprise needs really were. And we saw this interesting hole in the market where, managed WordPress and just WordPress in general was enterprise in every meaningful way. It supported large businesses. It was mission critical, even to a brand new blogger or content generator. Somebody who started, an online presence for the very first time. They immediately have mission critical needs that were very oftentimes overlooked. We had sales cycles and experiences, dealing with very large organizations, but those same principles, that same enterprise mentality, lended itself very well to anybody in WordPress. So, you mentioned the words, are you new or you're not new?
Yeah.
Are we the best kept secret, right? I mean, that's kind of what we get a lot of the times from some of these agencies that we're speaking to these days. And the reality is that we're not. We've been operating this super high level of service. We call it the site-specific level of management. And owning our own infrastructure and our network facilitates a lot of that workflow for us. But the reality is the high level of service is what folks come to us for, and is ultimately what generally leads the conversation when somebody tends to talk about who their host is and talk about BigScoots. It's all about, what are we doing for them? How have we solved a problem for them recently? What have we done proactively for them? What PHP processes or plugin conflicts or all these other sorts of things that we fix quite regularly for folks that other hosts typically stay very hands off. All of that has been word of mouth for effectively the entirety of 14 years. We've recently developed some initiatives to really go out and tell that story. And it's an interesting predicament to be in, because we've spent 14 years redefining service, iterating 100 times a week on really what it is to offer the highest level of managed WordPress service in the industry. So as we sit here today, as close to, what we would call perfection as possible, we're sitting on this really interesting pedestal and sort of telling this story about, us as a managed WordPress host, and folks who take a look at us or give us a try for the first time, see that, 14-year history and, millions of iterations is what it feels like over that entire period of time. So it's an interesting predicament to be in. We are by no means new. We are incredibly encased in all things WordPress and managed WordPress specifically. And we love being in this community, in the space that we're in. But we're just now telling the story, and it is exciting. Very exciting.
So the new and not new is an interesting approach, because generally a hosting company in the WordPress ecosphere starts very specifically to start hosting WordPress. You have a very different road to ending up at the same intention. I'm kind of curious because it's such a different route that you took to get where you are currently at. What triggers the moment that you go from very much into infrastructure? And I'm assuming here, but correct me where I'm wrong. If you're hosting your own data centers, I'm assuming you configure the servers themselves. You focus on the software that it runs on them. You take care of the whole data center itself. At what point did that start to become less of a infrastructure job and more of a hosting job? Because that's an interesting transition. I know plenty of data center owners type of outfits, but not a lot of them go actually into hosting itself. That's an interesting one. How did that came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started. It came about really when we started. We started with the idea of wanting to offer the best service we could. At the time, that looked like infrastructure management, and ultimately that eventually progressed into an application layer of management where folks needed that extra assistance. Demanding a high level of service in any industry really means progressing down or up the tech stack, if you want to look at it that way. The more ownership and control you have over what it is that you do, the more flexibility and ultimately, in our case, better delivery of the service to the end user you can provide. So, offering infrastructure was really kind of, the breadcrumbs or just the initial entry point into managed hosting. But eventually we saw the light. We said it.
Yeah, almost like you needed an excuse to start.
Yeah, we really did. I mean, being passionate about service is not an uncommon thing. There's a lot of great service providers out there in the world, in various different industries. For whatever reason, it's incredibly uncommon in hosting. And to a greater extent, co-location and data center services and going up the ranks further into like telecom. It's a world that you wouldn't even recognize. But in managed WordPress, we felt that there was this need where, enterprise users, whether they be small, medium, or large, needed a very high level, very hands-on, as we call site-specific level management. How do we do that? Well, if we own the full stack, we can do it better than anybody else. And we knew that. Certainly, there were many barriers to entry. Physically purchasing infrastructure, which is part of the reason some of the brand names that everybody knows don't do it. It's just the capital expenditure and the management of that infrastructure is a
for sure
burden to bear. One that we've been doing for so long that we've become very good at it, very proficient. It creates exciting opportunities where we're the first to get current generation infrastructure, even ahead of many of the other larger hosts out there, just because we've had these relationships for such a long period of time. Those hurdles over the years translated to needing to get our own switching environment, needing to get our own network uplinks, our own edge routing. We have physical office, on premise, inventory management, all of the backend components to manage all those pieces. PDU and power management. Eventually translating up to how do we secure all this? Talking about on-site teams and human management of those teams. Incorporating, in our case, Magic Transit, for always on DDoS protection against our network. And, as infrastructure became more available from like a resource perspective, we've seen that it quite dramatically outpaced cloud computing as well. So we're seeing this really interesting cycle where over the years, a lot of people went up to the cloud. A lot of people are coming back down again because you're able to get so much more resources per dollar spent relative to cloud computing. And built the way that infrastructure is these days, incredibly reliable. So it's an interesting dynamic. But if you want to offer the best service in anything you do, owning as much of that service delivery as possible is really the key to that. And in our case, we own the whole thing. So it gives us a chance to really put that sharp pencil onto paper and dial in service.
Yeah, I think I remember Jason Fried recently. Was it him or DHH? I think either one of them had a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, where they're saying we are moving everything back from AWS.
Yeah, I think I might have seen that too. I don't remember who it was, but maybe there could have been many. many posts, but it was a very famous
Yeah,
because they outlined all the wins because of it. Yeah,
yeah, the wins, but also the financial consequences. So yes, you have to put the money up front because you have
right.
to buy it. Well, in most cases, you can actually still lease it, so that's also an option. But the benefits that they had were not small. Like we're so accustomed to jumping to the cloud um, that we just kind of forget that there's a hidden cost which we're paying for in both money and you are entering a rigid system, right? There's no little bit of tweaks here, a little bit of tweaks there. Yes, in the software, but none in the hardware.
Cloud cloud computing is a beautiful thing. Many services that we use every day wouldn't exist without it. But if you look at the end user of a WordPress-based website, whether that be small, medium, or large, although service is a huge component, and I would advocate anybody who owns a managed WordPress or anybody who owns a WordPress site to seek out managed hosting because it's such a huge win with respect to proactive monitoring and catching issues that you otherwise might not be aware of, just because those individuals, those hosts, see that same issue 10,000 times. Most of the plugin incompatibilities and conflicts and what have you are solved in a matter of seconds, just because you've seen that same issue, the better part of the last several years. So managed hosting is so key. But if you set management aside for a moment and just talk about the actual resources provided from a cloud-based solution versus a infrastructure one, cloud is a beautiful thing for the hosts themselves. The idea that their financial partners and the business operations team can just turn up 2 or 3 or 5 times the resources. If they want to scale, they can do that. Inversely, they can turn them down. So that's a great thing. But what you don't get access to is that really, in a lot of cases, CPU the dollar spent per CPU resource gained, and that's a bit of a generalization, but CPU generally leads the market in terms of costs. CPU is what kind of like classes up a system or down, and you usually get corresponding bandwidth and memory and storage to go along with it. So CPU is usually always your bottleneck. And the interesting thing about it is that inside a modern enterprise grade system, you're looking at somewhere on the order of 5 to 10 10 times the resources for the same dollar spent. So it's really an order of magnitude different. It's not like we're talking about a few shifts upward by moving to physical infrastructure. The other component is that you really don't lose any reliability. If anything, you might gain some. Cloud computing in most managed hosting environments is still done on an isolated machine. If you lose the machine, you can very oftentimes lose the service. That data center that these hosts rely on, they do have protocols in place to help restore those systems on a somewhat short order. But that compared to isolated systems that have isolated problems, where you can, in many cases, restore much quicker because you have full control over the entire tech stack. The reality is that if there is a failure, which can sometimes be less regular than a cloud-based one, the resolution time can be much quicker as well. So there's a bit of a facade around reliability and performance and scalability when it comes to cloud computing versus infrastructure, because with good, solid managed infrastructure, you can get ahead, stay ahead of those resource demands very easily because the costs are so much lower. And if you're with a good quality managed provider, they can also keep a close eye, a proactive monitoring on that infrastructure to the point where it can be, in a lot of cases, more reliable than a cloud-based solution. So I see just big wins across the board, more specifically in certain areas like dynamic queries, ones that are very, very, very heavy CPU required services like WooCommerce and membership, like BuddyBoss and all these other types of platforms. Yep. But even without that, how, a cloud-based CPU, 2.5, maybe 3 gigs on the top end versus a 5.5 or 6 gig clock speed, you can facilitate those PHP processes on the order of 2 to 3 times as quick. So even in a fully cached site, you can still benefit dramatically.
You're fully speaking my language here.
Yeah, well, that's great. I love talking infrastructure. So, it's in our bones, right? It's where we started. So, it's exciting.
I've I don't know when, but somewhere in the early 2000s, I started with my own scripts and setting up servers and stuff like that. And for the longest time, I've maintain them in some version of a sysadmin type role / WordPress developer. But at a certain point in time, you learn enough to understand that you're never going to fully grasp every single aspect, every single bit, unless you dedicate on that entirely, which I wasn't
Just
planning.
like anything in life, right? Just like
Exactly.
anything.
So,
Yeah.
and I was like, no, I mean, I like it, but I don't like it that much. So then you start researching, and then, fast forward a couple of years, I've worked at a hosting company as well, Servbolt, and you learn more in the type of, like, how should the stack actually look like. I already had ideas about it, but then one thing that struck me very clearly in the, let's say, starting 5-6 years ago, is that cloud hosting solves a great many problems, but it also introduces one, and I'm focused on performance a lot. So latency is a thing I do not like, because it compounds. And the mere fact that if you have cloud hosting, you most likely have a database server on a different physical server than the actual web server. That in itself introduces latency. There's something that you already have to overcome at the root. So yeah, you speaking, like I said, you speaking my language. I like this.
Yeah, well, just to give you a nice little use case for that very specific scenario, one thing that we very oftentimes do is for some of those heavier CPU oriented websites, which are typically dynamic oriented websites and WooCommerce, and really anything, just for your viewers, anything where you don't want everybody to see the same thing. So anything that you can't fully cache is ultimately something that's typically dynamic, that has to funnel through your CPU. The more CPU you have, the more funneling without queuing up you can do. More cores, faster cores, all facilitates better throughput through the CPU. One great example of a very easy solution that we deliver to folks all the time is somebody who runs a WooCommerce or e-commerce based shop. Separating the web and database onto separate servers, like you just mentioned, can pose a problem. However, directly interconnecting that from at point to point with 20 gig fiber means that you're operating on maybe a 1 millisecond latency rather than the compute of the network fabric that you would otherwise have to facilitate, in a cloud-based environment. So that's just an easy win. That's just a clear cut kind of infrastructure point in the infrastructure category. Being flexible and creative with your approach to solving problems that are typically pushed to the side and just keep upgrading. But the reality is, if you can scale horizontally and vertically at the same time, more CPU while also separating services out, you're able to push your dollar much further, and ultimately you get a much better performing solution as a result of that. So, just kind of like an interesting kind of take on some of the solutions that we try to provide.
So what is your background? How did you roll into this?
Yeah. So, I mean, my business partner, so he was data center through and through. I mean, he was a scripting aficionado, in the grade school and high school days, and he was always like laser focused, in his basement, in his shell prompts, and just doing all the interesting things that he felt super interesting. In my case, I mean, I've always kind of had this interesting passion for service. Shown in different ways over the years, with various business opportunities and things like this. But my business partner and I, we met quite a long time ago. We met on the order of about 20 years ago. We met in high school, and we didn't have the great idea of BigScoots at the time. We just had a bit of fun and got to know each other, and had some fun together. But as the years rolled on, we kind of came to each other and said, there's something we can do here. You have a passion for scripting. You're this. He to this day, Justin, my business partner, is the system admin that system admins go to solve their problems. I mean, he is a leader in the WordPress troubleshooting community at every level. In my case, I really wanted to start a business, a platform that we could facilitate this really high level of service. He was in a data center environment. It made all the sense in the world to come together and build a business and a platform off of what we both felt very passionate about. I had kind of an interesting story over the years where that progressed through my college years. And I had this moment where it was sort of like, okay, where am I going? Which path am I going to take? I was going to medical school. I was going to lean into
I'm going
BigScoots
to ask, what did you go to college to? But medical school is quite a different direction.
It is, and so biomedical engineering is the degree path that I took. It was an exciting, exhilarating project, or life. It feels like a lifetime ago. Did all the things that you would do in pre-med. All the volunteering. Established myself as an EMT and did all this great stuff, and it was super rewarding and exciting. But it didn't necessarily fill that hole that I had in my where I really, as an entrepreneur at heart. Felt that I had to, it really kind of, it just felt that I was leaning this direction this whole way through it. But there was a kind of this pivotal moment where I was like, okay, I've graduated, I'm going to medical school, or I'm pursuing, BigScoots full time. I'm a business partner and he living in Chicago, me living remote, kind of leaned into it. And it was just, it's been, it's been wonderful. It's wonderful ever since, to say it in just a few words, but.
Yeah, that's a very interesting path. I know a few more medical or medical educated people working in WordPress. Some of them are still, and whatever they do in WordPress is on the side. But you don't hear this route a lot. It's that's an interesting one.
If
Are you officially Dr. Scott, or?
No, so I was set to go, and it was sort of a parting of ways with my, aspirations that I built up for, 4 or 5 years versus, direction that I, really felt a yearning to go to, which ultimately became WordPress and everything we do here. There is a huge sense of passion that we have every day towards delivering the level of service that we do. And it's, pretty salesy to say so. It sounds a little fishy for me to say such a thing, but it's a wonderful thing to have, a team that sort of shares in this passion, this culture, seeing, 200-300 tickets kind of come through our support desk on any given day. And the vast majority of them have all caps, thank yous and smiley faces. And, you save the day. Years on some occasions, where it's just like, I've been having this problem for so long, and now you've solved. So there is a real reward to that. Like we know we're contributing to individuals, small businesses, large enterprises. We know we're contributing to them moving forward in the way that they're attempting to in WordPress and in an online presence. And we're happy to be a part of that. It's super rewarding and it's exciting. So I have that real passion for that, and that's what excites me.
Oh, you can tell. This is I'm from the Netherlands. I'm European. I have a different. No, I think I can say that we have a different approach to service in Europe than what we see in the United States.
I lived in Europe for a while. I would absolutely agree. I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So to see somebody have this amount of passion for delivering service is, from our perspective, mostly happen on the other side of the pond. But it's interesting to see you're genuine in this, which is an interesting concept. Again, from purely observational from a European standpoint. We have service here, and there's plenty of businesses and whatnot where you can find equal the type of service, and I for one strive to deliver the same type of service. But I also think that it's partly because I've lived in the U.S. and I kind of understand how it works differently there. And what you're essentially saying is that you have a co-founder who has a particular passion on the infrastructure side of things, and your passion is to turn that into a service, which is a very interesting approach. Again, this is also not a very common route that you hear.
Yeah, I think the most common route that an individual would take into a hosting world would be offering it as like a supplemental service to maybe their development or SEO agency platform, or maybe having a partner or a previous industry experience where they would,
I know quite a few hosting companies where it started from an agency that turned into a hosting company. Pagely is a good example of that. but there are
Yeah,
plenty of those where
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you have the client base, you want to build that, supplemental revenue, and you see the whole
yeah,
and you want to run with it. I mean, Pagely did some very interesting things. Yeah, my business partner, I mean, we oftentimes say to each other, like he wouldn't be here with me, I wouldn't be here with him. I mean, it's incredibly unique that we found each other at the time in our lives when we did.
I'd say so. If that happened in high school,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we eventually came back together again in the early college years to pursue BigScoots, but we had this just interesting dynamic between each other. We kind of understood each other, right from the get go. He understood what he was good at. I understood what I was good at. I mean, he would jokingly hand off, sales and billing, and at the time, like legal and accounting, things to my shoulders. On the flip side, I would immediately, roll off like support requests and things, his direction. I think over the years we've blended a little bit as we needed to support the business and the growth of it, but we still have these like passions. He's super passionate about automation and reliability, scalability. These days, performance is key to everything. So I mean, his involvement with everything to do on the performance side is massive, and in a as big a way as it could be. And then on the flip side, still being laser focused on service and direction that I am. I mean, I'm in the weeds every day. Handling chats, calls. I certainly can't do it all day, but getting to our customers, still listening to them, learning from their problems, things that we could be doing better. Best way to do that is to stay in the weeds. And, we've been doing that the whole way through, and I plan to continue to do it for the life of BigScoots, which I hope is a very long time.
yeah. I was going to ask if there's I think Ben Gabler from Rocket.net. He I think about a month ago posted something where he said something along the lines, as CEO, he jumped into support as well. And somebody, I don't know if that actually happened as a response to that post or whatever, but somebody said something along the lines of a CEO shouldn't be part of the support. I read that and I was like, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think as a CEO, you get there's no better chance to learn the thing. First off, you need to be capable to answer the questions, right? So it starts there. But if you are, it makes a hell of a lot of sense for me as a CEO to regularly jump into support and see what type of questions there are, what angles there are, what hidden needs there are, and all of that. And I'm assuming you would agree with that, because I just heard you say.
I would. I mean, I think there's perhaps a lot of worlds in which maybe that is true. Maybe it's true that a CEO's time is maybe better spent in other areas. There's certainly a lot of things that I need to do as CEO to keep the business operating.
Sure.
That isn't, staying in the weeds, as it were. But there's really, especially with our business being so laser focused on service, there's really no possible way that I can make decisions at the top in terms of like hiring and budgeting, and ultimately, the meetings that we hold with our various teams, making sure that all of them blend together. We have a mutual goal amongst all of our departments to deliver this high level of service, and we call it our customer success goal. Like, everybody's part of customer success, and sort of having outlook in all these various departments is key to kind of keeping that blending always kind of coming back and forth. There's always technical bits that need to funnel through to the sales and billing and onboarding, customer success side, and flip side is always also true. But staying engaged, whether it be phone calls, whether it be part of agency meetings, whether it be live chats, really of any size, it gives insight into what's going on, what folks are most concerned with, what we can be doing better. A lot of times it's like a follow-up that I'm jumping into from like a previous interaction. What could we have done better in that instant? Being, one key piece of what we try to do as well is give, certain features and insight and transparency into what it is we do here for our customers. So a lot of other hosts try to like close off, resource utilization and certain things like that. We go the other direction. We create full transparency in your utilization. What services do you get? We give certain features and certain access. Things like DNS and email. Some of the things that typically get sectioned off to like third parties are all managed internally. So what can we build? What can we do better? Whether it be perhaps somewhat unrelated or just kind of like something in parallel to what the customer might be bringing up. There's always something to learn from any and all chats.
Exactly. And then as soon as you no longer enter that chat, then you are living and learning through the filters of your
Exactly.
colleagues, and whatever best intentions they have, they don't have your filter. No, I agree.
Exactly.
I think that's a very, very healthy approach. Obviously, like I said, the knowledge level needs to be there, right? You need, and I don't mean that from a sales perspective or pure technical perspective, but um, I know CEOs that you shouldn't want to have in the chat, and that's fine too. They bring a different set of qualities to the table. But if you have them, and then there's a wonderful opportunity to bring back what you hear into your own world, internalize that, and then turn that into, okay, so this is how we can improve. This is how we can do that better. Just makes a lot of sense to me to play it smart in that regard.
I would totally, completely agree. I would say it happens more times than not. Having a conversation. I mean, just literally this morning, right before this call, we had an agency conversation. I jumped into it. It was part of myself and our sales team, and it was an agency who was interested in uplifting their service, transitioning on over to us, and they mentioned a few features that they perhaps were interested in. Something that a few API endpoints, for example, that were not available to them with their current host. And sure, let's build those. So, I was on the call. I was basically just saying like, okay, those are not currently available. We'll put them in our pipeline. We'll get them out in 5 days. And that's the game plan. So we've got them in our pipeline, just had that meeting right after that. So before these, between this and that.
Yep.
And, now we've got a new feature that's going to be available to everybody. And it was just off the back of that one interaction. So that's what we see all the time.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. Interesting. I asked before, but I don't think I got a dedicated answer in terms of there is a moment when WordPress became a little bit more than something that happened every now and then. What is the moment that you decided as a company that investing into specific WordPress solutions, or whether that's knowledge or hosting setup, when did that happen? And is there a trigger, or is it a whole bunch of triggers that just happen more and more?
Yeah, WordPress has been around, what feels like forever, since the early 2000s. Certainly we've had our hands in and around that since day one, just in the sense that WordPress has always had a place, perhaps somewhat considerably smaller than today. But we've always been in and around WordPress. Quite some time ago, we were doing WordPress, managed WordPress, quote unquote, well before, let's say WP Engine, coined the phrase managed WordPress. But we were doing it in a different capacity. We're doing it as just, okay, we're going to offer this really high level of service. WordPress is part of this particular custom stack that this client happens to have. We're going to learn it. We're going to understand it, and we're going to be able to serve as their partner to managing this platform for them. That just became more and more and more regular. WordPress was coming to us. It was very clear that it was becoming, the industry standard for the large majority. This was probably, so 2010 is ultimately when we had our upstart. That's when we put the stake in the ground and, called ourselves BigScoots. This was probably, let's call it like 2015, 2016, where we were leaning more and more and more and more and more into WordPress. It was very clear that throughout that time, WordPress was gaining ground in the way, in the customers that we service. So a lot of folks were like, for example, switching off like Magento, or the most common was switching off like a custom CMS of some sort, or maybe no CMS at all. They'd have a custom bespoke, PHP platform or something like that. They were transitioning to WordPress. They didn't know enough about WordPress. WordPress wasn't necessarily what it is today either. To make an understatement,
2015.
It certainly has, all for the better in my view, but there is naturally problems that come from it as well. There's complications between plugins. Having a plugin available for any type of service that you might want to offer naturally means that there's going to be conflicts, because you're going to have other plugins for other services that you want to offer. Being able to diagnose and understand those plugins and then the conflicts between them is certainly a bit of a new age problem. But around that time,
the plugins have increased tremendously since in the last 8 years. That's I don't know what it was 8 years ago, but we're at 60,000 plus now. So
Yes, and we have to remember they're all built by a different developer. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily all speak to each other. There's a million and one
They
ways in
definitely
which
don't.
that they don't play nice with each other in a lot of cases. So
Yeah.
having a team to support that is crucial in my opinion. But around that timeline, 16, 17, in that era, the writing was on the wall. We were always this managed service provider. That was who we were. Site specific partner is the verbiage that we like to use.
Yep.
WordPress became more and more prominent. It only made sense to start investing in building our own like portal, for example. Started creating features where we would offer things like staging and cloning and access to your own backups and all these sorts of things that are commonplace today. But that was being built around that time to give access to customers or give customers access to their own data and certain features that they would otherwise expect to have available to them. Around that time, we took the onus to start managing DNS as well. So we share a Cloudflare Enterprise platform, and we like to take ownership of the DNS. That served us very well because it gave us the opportunity to really facilitate super seamless migrations. We could onboard folks to migration or to emails, set up SMTP. You could do all these other sorts of things that would otherwise not be available.
Well, if you have full control, you are in control.
It's true. Now we don't take management or the DNS away from the customer. We just, again, serve as that partner. So
but
if the customer doesn't have a Cloudflare account, we'll create one for them, but we will just simply have access to that. We actually pulled into our portal these days. But just giving us that access, it allows us a more transparent and full partnership. Just one more little thing that we do.
If the if the move to focus more on WordPress, is at what point? No, let me rephrase. Have you ever been to a WordPress meetup or a WordCamp?
Yeah, certainly. So the first one I ever went to was a local one in Chicago, and the last one I went to was WordCamp Europe. That was in Germany. That was a few years ago. That was unfortunately one of my last personal meetups at a WordCamp, and that had a lot to do with COVID, and also I have a young family now, and it's hard to find the time to get away from my home office here, other than when visiting the data center or what have you. But yeah, certainly have. Our team is frequenting the circuit this year, so very excited to get some in-person feedback, and I'm really quite looking forward to it.
Yeah, so the Chicago one I have missed, but being one of the co-founders of WordCamp Europe, I obviously know that one.
I would assume you were in WordCamp Germany then. We probably brushed shoulders.
I was in WordCamp Europe in Berlin. Yes,
Berlin. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
I remember it fondly. Yeah.
I do too. I think in size that was the biggest one, possibly. Yeah, I think so. But it's so the reason I ask is because from my perspective, the best way to get to know, not just the regular WordPress users, but anybody who has. So I did a recent podcast with Roger Williams, and one of the things we discussed was this. There is a certain amount of dedication that is needed for somebody to go from I'm going to go to an event. It's out of my comfort zone. Most folks in this direction that we work in are somewhat of an introvert. That to then go to a conference, to maybe also speak, to interact with others, it's quite a few steps that you have to take, and it isn't until that you are there that you can appreciate the huge impact that the project has, because then you see all these other people enjoying basically the same piece of software that you do, which is every single time. And when I talked about this with Roger as well, every single time we like sit and think about that concept, it blows my mind of the impact that it has and continues to have. And I was wondering when you first went, like, what was the vibe, the idea, the feedback that you took home? Like, okay, this is interesting. And I mean, I'm not just talking to clients and potential clients and stuff like that, but on the vibe of what is the project like, what is the community like?
Yeah, really interesting. And I'd say both of those, if we think about Chicago and I think about like Berlin as like kind of like two separate experiences. I mean, Chicago was quite early on in our early days. I mean, that really kind of opened my eyes, I think, to like, what is WordPress, even in our small little community here in Chicago. I mean, Chicago was naturally where we started our business. That's where our data center is based, that's where our office is. It's interesting to think that just right out in our front door, we have this like community of folks, as you've said, who all enjoy the same piece of software and use it to, build businesses around and enterprises and, get started on for the first time online. And, I mean, that was quite eye opening to me. In Berlin, it was very interesting. I was living in Europe at the time, in London, and it was just a quick jaunt over there. So it made all the sense in the world to go visit.
Probably for
Um,
£49.
yeah, yeah, I suspect it was probably somewhere in that range.
Big
But
place.
it is. Yeah, the taxi cab from to the airport is much more time. It was about 2 or 3 times the cost of the actual flight itself. But um, yeah, that too. It's kind of maybe a bit of a similar experience where it's like, people all the way over here, on the other side of the world, we have, the kind of shared common interest. And we always had this interesting take on, or I guess me personally, because we are so in touch, I guess, if you want to say that, if you will, with our customer base. Like we learn what our customers need, what our end users require on a daily basis. I mean, we take every opportunity, every ticket, every response, everything we interact with, every touch point that we have, we try to get something more out of it. And I think we've been learning, WordPress, we've been learning about our customer, we've been understanding, what a WordPress site owner at every level needs for so long that it didn't feel necessarily like I was connecting anymore with customers. When I was at these events, it felt just more eye-opening in the sense that, these are real people, taking that big jump, as you said, to go to a conference and interact with each other. And they do so in a lot of cases for just the pleasure of networking and maybe getting out of their home office and just connecting with some other folks. They don't necessarily always do it for, financial, gain,
Oh, no.
connections or
I
new
think that's
sales.
a
So
very
I
small
thought that
minority.
that was very exciting as well. Kind of the community aspect to it is maybe that's the word I'm looking for, is just how community oriented, even in a commercial setting, um it is. That was, I think, very exciting.
Yeah, I could, um, like I said, I think there's a small minority that comes there to make money as the motivator. I think most come there to connect, to learn, to essentially um, vibe with the same type of people about the same type of interests.
I would
I'm
agree.
always amazed about my favorite track is the hallway track. It always has been, but getting to know people uh, on a personal level is what I like. Is one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast. Getting to know people who share a similar interest is then a bonus, a plus, and that's essentially what these meetups and WordCamps are about for me. If
I completely agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so if from Big Scoot's perspective, right? You. So first off, how many people work at your company?
There's 43
43. Okay, so
43 of us. Yeah.
that's a good size. So have you ever gone as a team? Is that something that you've done, or
It's tricky. It's tricky.
yeah, I was gonna say
Nad,
there's a few people
you,
that need to stay.
yeah, so we send groups. So we've been able to go as groups. That's the initiative. So
Yeah.
WordCamps have been something that we're eagerly jumping into over the last, like, let's call it 8 months, and looking forward. As many WordCamps as we can get our hands on, we're excited and looking to dive in. We have also attended like some local Chicago-based meetups. One is, for example, Tastemaker, and some other ones. We've always had an excitement to come together as a team, and at the same time, uh, you know, come and get to know customers, and put our faces out there and shake some hands and just connect better with the community as much as possible. It is difficult though. I mean, a lot of people ask me about our business, maybe who are not a part of WordPress or understand hosting, and they don't necessarily understand that this business has been mission critical since the day we opened our doors, right? Like it's like we have to operate in a 24/7 format. We
Yeah.
have to be always
That is a
available.
hosting company.
Yeah, and it's a tricky industry to excel in because of that fact. Most owners, will get burnt out before they get over those hurdles of like having a team. And we were fortunate enough to have a great partnership and find some really key team members really early on. So we were able to overcome that burden that a lot of folks misstep on. But we've had this somewhat unfortunate dynamic where we just really haven't had a lot of time together in person. We do try to organize such that different folks are meeting different people at the same time or overlapping at different times or at the same time rather. But
Mostly,
what I will say,
are you working
um,
mostly remote or?
we do. So we have a small office in Chicago for the purposes of managing our infrastructure, and there is some overlap with some of the meetups that we do. But the biggest thing is really the connectivity that our team has amongst each other. So everything is completely collaborative. Like any and every ticket, any and every issue, every chat, every call, anything that requires or maybe not requires, but it just has an interesting point or something somebody's willing to share. There's always a comment and overlap and interaction amongst the team. Multiple weekly stand-ups amongst everybody just to kind of keep everybody up to date with whatever's going on. And there's the modern era of working online is much different than what it was. It's you're super connected, and it's part of our culture at this point.
No,
Being culturally connected is a huge way in which we deliver the service we do.
yeah. So the reason I'm asking, because the reason I'm asking about WordCamps and the experience and you as a company going there, yes or no, and I was assuming it wouldn't be in full company capacity because you're a hosting
Tricky.
company.
It's tricky. Yeah,
It's
you
tricky.
can only do so much from your phone. So yeah.
Well, you can have, if you have root access, it's surprising that you can do on a phone, but no, but my curiosity is in what visiting a WordCamp would have brought about inside the company. I've heard many interesting stories of people going there as a team, and then because maybe you are aware and maybe you have gone before to a WordCamp, but generally most employees they haven't, because it's not prioritized for the and this is a good one to keep in mind. The vast majority of companies with WordPress we will never see because they don't come at WordCamps. They're not active on the Twitter community or the Facebook groups. They're just lurking. They may be there, but you'll never know it's them. And then when they end up going to a WordCamp or a meetup, they're surprised about the interactivity that there's there. The lack of oh, you are my competitor, I shall not share data with you, I shall not share information with you is gone. And the whole concept of how that works, like why would somebody go up and freely share information that I can use to my benefit? That whole I know a lot of examples of companies that once they did go for the first time, they were like, oh crap, we should have been here before. This is good. This is nice. This is a warm bath, so to speak.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think my first experience was somewhat similar to that, and my experience once again in Berlin was also pretty similar to that. We've been going a lot this year. It's actually been really exciting. Just again, we're in the position where we've been so interested in iterating for such a long period of time that it's been so much recently when we felt the need to sort of tell our story, so to speak. So we're at a point now where it's exciting to go because we can share. We have the kind of the verbiage and the sort of the attachment to like a reoccurring initiative to attend as many events as we can to kind of get out there and connect and get to know other people in the community. We've kind of been in the trenches, so to speak, and it feels we're kind of lifting our head up and looking around, and it's very exciting. Yeah. Yeah, so we spent a long time in said trenches, but it was for good reason. There was a lot that we needed to do. We feel like we've done it. Coming up and looking around, getting to know the community, just even this short time that we've been focused on it, has been amazing. Part of our team, some of our team has attended some recent for WordCamps. I think the most recent one was in Phoenix that they went to,
Yep.
and just hearing the new conversations that they're starting, and some folks heard about us, didn't really know where we are, and sort of connecting together, and just, oh, you're doing this, we're doing this. I mean, it's super exciting, and yeah, the rivalries just don't even make sense. I mean, they've never made sense to me mentally, anyways, because there's 500 million WordPress websites. I mean, if you're doing something interesting, folks are going to take notice of that. That's the way that I've always thought about it.
I agree.
But the community nature of WordPress, drives, I think, so much interesting conversation, and you just don't have that same overlap or competitiveness that you would otherwise have in a lot of industries. I think because everything is based on this like open source, super exciting, community-driven platform. So
It is, and I think again, this is a topic I touch with Roger as well. I think it is the open source component of it that. Um, if you're interested in open source, you're interested in making the world a better place.
yeah, for sure.
And open source just happens to be, I think, a very good principle to use and to share knowledge and to build and to learn together. No, it's
So many opportunities it's created too. Like I think to like individual moments I've had over this 14 years of operating BigScoots, and I think of like key, like on a first name basis, like clients that I've interacted with, and I knew their personal circumstance, and I knew, perhaps the trouble they were in or the difficulty they were having at any given time for whatever reason. And, the use of WordPress or the availability of WordPress has ultimately like lifted them out of that, of course, through their hard work and putting the pedal to the metal and getting them to where they are today. But it's given them a platform and an opportunity that I think it's pretty special. I think it's incredibly unique. I don't really think there's many industries that offer such a robust enterprise platform.
Yeah, I struggle to find one. If and not just because I'm using it, because periodically I will check out other platforms and other solutions, and I just don't see it. Not in the way that that this community is operating.
I agree.
You mentioned a little while back. You mentioned you were excited for the future of WordPress. That sort of makes me conclude that you like the direction the project is taking with the block editor and the site editor. Is that or...
Well, I think generally, I think generally speaking, I kind of am. I mean, there's always this ongoing battle, kind of this feedback loop between, what Google says, what other industry, services say, how WordPress responds to it, how community members sort of take to what WordPress is doing and kind of mold it into like something new. And then ultimately WordPress iterates on it. I mean, there's this feedback cycle of just this whole community, the internet at large, kind of coming together. So, the way that I see it is direction has always been subject to change. I mean, I do think giving more tools to individual users to be able to create, more bespoke and more interesting website to their own specifications. I think that's unique. I personally don't love these proprietary site building platforms. I don't think they offer the opportunity that WordPress does. However, they do offer in a lot of cases that easy onboarding. So I think transitioning into more of a site builder-esque type solution, I think can offer a lot more of that opportunity. Does it bode well to sort of the enterprise nature? I mean, I think it still can, and I think it still does. I mean, WordPress is being open source in the nature that it is, being incredibly customizable. I don't really think that WordPress's direction necessarily, so long as like performance and security is always kept at the top of the priority list, does it really impact anybody else's business model or initiatives going forward? So I think I'm excited that so many people are committing or are contributing to the core. Ongoing conversations amongst my team and the community that we're part of, and seeing real feedback being taken and interacted or interactions with WordPress developers, all that is awesome to see. So I'd say yes. Generally, I'm really excited about what's coming.
What's your favorite feature? What are you like? Oh, this is really neat. This is what I love.
I mean, I don't know. That's a little testy. I'm as far as the future goes, like what's ahead, or
Yep. Yep.
what's in WordPress at the moment.
Either. So I'm just curious, and in the sense of the, you can use it to build pretty much anything now. That doesn't mean you should build anything in it, but it can. If you wanted to, it can. And for me, for instance, the most interesting feature for a long time has just simply been the ability to create custom post types and custom taxonomies, because that meant I could basically inject any data structure in there. I've built sites that had 15 custom post types and numerous amounts of taxonomies. That has always been my favorite feature. My favorite feature now is still that, but I really like the slow maturing of the site editor and the block editor as we see it.
I think that's a good term. That's good phrasing, and I think I would agree on that specific choice of phrasing, the slow maturity of it. I think giving
Yes.
more access. The thing I'm most excited about is the slow maturity towards giving more access to more people, more individuals, more businesses to WordPress. That's what I'm most excited about. I think there's always been, this maturation and progression towards that. I think there's a little bit more of a dedicated outlook on it now, which I appreciate. But we have a different take, right? Like as a host, I mean, things like optimization, performance, and security. I mean, these are the key pieces. How much is WordPress listening to Google and hosts and developers in terms of like incorporating some of those changes? It's
More
tough
and
to really
more.
say because they come and go, right? I mean, I think it is more and more. But if you had to put your finger on something, I would say just if you look at WordPress, it's just up to the right. It's just more and more access to WordPress is giving more and more access to new sites, new content, more voices are being heard. That's all very exciting. As that just having that progress further is very exciting, and I think core to WordPress, the kind of ethos of it, and it's just moving in that direction, continue to move in that direction is that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I agree. It's the general direction that it's being taken. Probably the last year to really get a strong foothold. At least that's how I see 2023. For me, was a year where the maturity started to happen. We're not mature yet, but the maturity started to happen. It's also where the WordPress core performance team started to really make an impact in terms of optimizing core, like optimizing queries, optimizing loading assets. All of these things are being looked at. We have, with the upcoming 6.5 that we have now, we have the performance translations, which, English is not my first language. So I deal with quite a few WordPress sites that are not in English. To be focused on performance and to have to work with a slightly slower version of a WordPress site just because I speak a different language is always a weird concept. But
Yeah.
stuff like that being tackled is, I'm a big fan of where things are going.
Yeah, you have to be excited about it for sure. I mean, just the just the fact that there's more and more adoption, there's more and more WordPress sites, there's more and more sites converting from non CMS and other CMSs towards WordPress. Like clearly, this this direction fuels innovation as well, which is exciting. So regardless of what we've seen in the past and what roadmaps currently are in place, you can only expect that to further improve and expand, as time goes on based on the way the market's heading. So that's exciting, I'd say as well.
I agree. And I think on that agreement, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's been interesting to learn your absolute dedicated passion for managed WordPress hosting in the broadest sense of the words, and especially your, what's the word I was going to use? The root of coming from a infrastructure and understanding all of those layers. I'm a big fan. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Remkes. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Cheers. All right. And then we hit pause.